you know what, I must be missing something. I feel like I'm working so hard, but am I working on my dream or am I working on somebody else's dream?
This is very sneaky, and I don't think it's something that's talked about enough.
Going from one job thinking you need to immediately replace it with another job, that is just being reactive as opposed to stepping back and saying, what would it look like if I were to give myself permission to just reimagine? Welcome to Career Compass, mapping your future. Visit yourcareerrevolution.com today to get your free guide on the benefits of working with a career ownership coach. Hello again, and welcome to Your Career Compass, the show dedicated to helping you reimagine and reclaim the life of your dreams. This is the second of a 10-episode podcast dedicated to the 10 steps of figuring out your ideal career. And today we really have a very fascinating and perhaps a little bit of a perplexing topic, because we want to help you figure out whether you may be suffering from something we call battered career syndrome. What on earth is battered career syndrome? Well, I think you may know it if you have it. You may recognize it, but you may be tone deaf to it, right? So think about it this way. If you have a career and it's not getting you to where you want to go, both personally and professionally, could it be that you may be suffering from battered career syndrome? Look, sometimes the trajectory of our careers can leave us feeling, honestly, a little bit battered and bruised. If you've got an inkling that you think, gosh, there has to be a better way to make a living, a better way to find purpose, a better way to progress in my career, what I want you to do is go to careercompassshow.com and find our quiz called Our Career Help Assessment. So take your career help assessment and let's see where that takes you. But with me today, I'm so excited. As always, Dr. Mike, I am so thrilled that you are my co-host, because Dr. Mike is an organizational psychologist and he's here today to help us really unpack this phenomenon. So why don't you go ahead and say hello and give a quick intro? I'd love that.
Why, hello, everyone. Tamara, it's good to see you again, as always. I really appreciate our time together. And just as a quick background, I did 26 years in the Air Force, last 3 on the Thunderbirds, transitioned into a corporate leader role at Berkshire Hathaway, working for Warren Buffett. Did that for about 10 years, and along the way got my PhD. And finally, it's funny that we're talking about this today, because I finally got to that point of battered career syndrome and had no idea what it was at the time and kind of what it was doing to me. I didn't realize it. So this topic is truly, truly important. I think that's one of the keys you're going to talk about. And you already mentioned it. This is very sneaky, and I don't think it's something that's talked about enough and put in the definition and explained the way that we're going to talk about it today, because I actually definitely went through it, and I'll share. But anyhow, thank you for taking the time to do this and help the thousands of people that you do. It's awesome.
I appreciate that. And I love the fact that you even said that you had an inkling that something was wrong, but you didn't know what it was. The fact that our founder actually was able to maybe even label it and coin a term for it, right, called battered career syndrome. We have found that, the tens of thousands of people that we work with on a daily basis, when they read it in the book or we talk to them about this concept, they're like, wait a minute, oh my gosh. You mean there are others out there that may be feeling the same way? I am not the only one. I mean, if you look at some of the Gallup surveys or the Business Insider surveys, how crazy is that? They say that nearly 3/4 of Americans working today, or actually anybody working globally, is 3/4 of the adult population are actively thinking about quitting their jobs. How insane is that, right? Or even the people who are gainfully employed, like you were, right, keep on thinking that, you know what, I must be missing something. I feel like I'm working so hard, but am I working on my dream or am I working on somebody else's dream? So, Dr. Mike, I'd love to get your perspective on this. Why do people stay in a situation that clearly is toxic, something that is not feeding their soul, and yet they keep on doing it? And in some instances, for an entire career, for an entire lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think fundamentally, and this is so ironic. I know I went through it too, but just kind of the way we're wired, right, as emotional human creatures, a lot of the times we find greater comfort in staying in a place of pain and discomfort rather than facing the unknown perceived potential pain of change, a career change, stepping out on our own, getting a promotion, going to a different company, right? Even moving like to a different area to take a new job. So many times we think it's easier to stay in that place of pain and discomfort. But really, the flip side of that coin is, what we'll talk about here in a little bit is just the psychological, then the mental, then the physical effects that it does take on a person. So I think that's fundamentally it is number one, we just find it more comfortable and easier, right, to stay there. But number two, and this is why I really, really like what you all do, and I'm so glad we're talking about this because it truly is a lack of awareness and education as to what this truly is, what it looks like, and more importantly, what you can do about it to get out of it, to change, to grow. So I think that's the twofold part to it is really just finding more comfort and staying where you are, hunkering down for the storm. And then the second piece is, again, just really not knowing what it is and why you're feeling the way you do specifically.
Yeah. I mean, it seems almost like it reminds me of the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, thinking that, well, maybe my boss is going to change. Maybe the environment's going to change. Maybe the economy is going to change, right? Maybe it's not so bad after all because, geez, who am I to think that, oh, poor me, I don't want to have the victim mentality. So, maybe I should just toughen up and hunker down. And it's interesting how you say how, well, stay in basically it's a comfort zone and rather deal with the devil we know than the devil we don't, right? So what if I leave this and life actually gets worse, right? That's maybe, part of the reason why people don't want to explore what else is possible. Or maybe some people don't just fear failure, they fear success. Who would I need to become if I actually leave my comfort zone? And I can't point the finger anymore and blame, and I need to start taking personal responsibility. Do you want to comment on any of that?
So yeah, you just said something that's really key is right that ownership and personal responsibility. Because by not taking ownership and personal responsibility for where we're at, we're totally giving away the power to change it. Right. So the moment that we step into objective reality versus delusion and just really truly take the time and create the space to unpack it, what we're going through, the way we're feeling, why we're feeling that way. And more importantly, don't be afraid to reach out to someone like you and the services you all provide to get that guidance in properly unpacking things. I think that's really the first step to taking back the power to implement the change and then execute on an action plan.
Yeah. Well, definitely realizing that, it may feel very isolated and may feel very personal to you right now. But honestly, it is the job market, right? Ever since I can remember, I mean, think back to the industrial, well, not that I was around in the Industrial Revolution, but if you think about history, right, as people evolve, change is a constant, right? As technology advances, as jobs get created, jobs become obsolete. So once again, some may say we are at a very exciting time in humanity, and others may say, "Are you kidding me? My existence or my reason for being or my job, the things that I pride myself in, are about to evaporate." And all of it may be true, but what I'm here to say is the job market will always fluctuate. The economy will always fluctuate. But if we can create a mindset where we recognize that there's opportunity. As a matter of fact, I was reading this book the other day by my friend Dan Thurman. He talks about positive chaos, right? Where there's chaos, there's opportunity, right? So if we can calm our minds for long enough and recognize what does it mean for me in the short run? What does it mean for me in the long term? How can I take advantage of this opportunity and realize that I actually have control and I don't need to be the victim of something like battered career syndrome? So let's move into maybe some of the short term effects of battered career syndrome. Now, are there, some immediate psychological impacts that you can think of?
So I would think so the most short-term impact is just that sense of feeling lost, right? Not really knowing what to do. not knowing what options you have, if any. And that sense of feeling lost, right, in the short term, then starts to spin into and drive more mid and long term feelings of, I think you mentioned this already, right? Isolation, a lack of a sense of fulfillment, a lack of purpose, a lack of direction. And when you start to get in that mindset, and the more you grow into it and embrace it without pausing to make the change, then you start to feel the deeper things of anxiety, stress, worry, lack, fear, doubt. So it's a very cyclical and a vicious cycle of going down that road. And again, a lot of times we don't even, we know kind of what's causing it, but we don't really know how to truly deal with it. In fact, it wasn't until I got a mentor that kind of helped me unpack and talk to me off the ledge of freaking out in my corporate job, right? Because I got to that point too where I didn't feel like I was making a difference. Things had changed, right? My job had changed from what it was. So it turned from one of, being able to be out with the people and building the relationships and letting them know that we cared because I showed I cared, into, yeah, we need you to really stay behind the desk more and start to do more spreadsheets and more budgeting and create policy. And that just wasn't me, because while all those things are important, my whole leadership career, my military career has always been about the people and the relationships, right? Being out there, being visible, being engaged. And I just didn't know how to deal with that, because I think this is one of the things that keeps us stuck in that comfort zone. I had a corporate manager title, steady paycheck every 2 weeks, huge office with an oak desk, right? So those were the kind of things that were dangling in front of me that kept me there. What am I going to do if I get demoted? What am I going to do if I leave? Can I even find another job where I can have this title, make this pay, have this circle of influence and this impact? So it was just that struggle that I was in, and I really didn't know how to deal with it. And the longer I stayed there, you know, what woke me up is my wife looked at me one day and said, "Dude, what is wrong with you?" 'Cause wasn't sleeping. I was losing weight. I wasn't eating. And I was just starting to get into a real mess. And that's when she kind of prodded me to reach out to a mentor who gave me the very first advice of, okay, dude, stop. Like, we need to create the space to unpack this. Give yourself time. More importantly, give yourself grace. And then let's start down that road of unpacking and really looking at what's going on.
My gosh, doctor, and you're one of the lucky ones to have a wife like Trish, right? Who recognized that something was not right, that you needed help. But in the book, we refer to it as the golden handcuffs, right? Everything we've aspired to be, everything we've aspired to become, once we've arrived, it may not be everything we had hoped for, or we realize that something else is missing. And so many times we find that people get stuck in their careers because from the outside looking in, their spouses, their family members, their peers are like, "Oh my gosh, doc, you're there. Like, why are you so miserable?" And you're like, "Yeah, I should be more grateful. Why am I not feeling fulfilled?" So really, one of the other things we talk about is figuring out your primary aim in life, and then making sure that you understand your goals, your needs, and aspirations. So many times, what we find is even when somebody figures out that this job or this career that I'm in is no longer serving me, you know what happens so often? They pivot to replace it with exactly the same thing, right? So they didn't actually treat the symptoms, they or fix the problem. They're just masking it, and now they're doing it for yet another organization. So unless we can break that vicious cycle and really help them see how in the short term, yes, many people may feel like in the short term I need a job, right? When we start unpacking it, what about the job do you need? Well, I need to pay my mortgage. Okay, so it's not the job that you need, it is a way to pay the mortgage. What if we were to find out that a job could do that, but there are other means of doing that? Would that help or get you closer to where you want to go? So I think sometimes people confuse the dream with the vehicle to the dream. So if you can figure out in the short term what type of income and what type of lifestyle you want, and then plan for the long term what type of wealth and equity we want, there's so many more vehicles than just the corporate grind than just the job. As a matter of fact, many of my colleagues will say, you know what job stands for, right?
What's that?
Just over broke,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't make that up and everything, but it's just to show how people get trapped in this hamster wheel and they're running faster and faster and they just not able to get out of it. So sometimes I love the fact that your wife said, stop, stop. Look at what's happening. It's a definition of insanity, and let's look elsewhere because so many people. We actually have another term for it. We call it crabs in a basket, where people around them who want to protect you actually keep you in this place of insanity for a lot longer because from the outside looking in, they think you have arrived. Why would you change that or risk everything you've worked so hard towards? I'd be interested in, if you stay in a place like that for too long, just the physical health impacts or the psychological health impacts it has on you. Do you mind talking about that? I feel like that's your area more so than mine, and I'm just so fascinated by that.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things I like to say is, Carl Rogers is a renowned psychologist. Back in the mid 70s, he had done a lot of research and interviewing a lot of participants in different surveys and programs he was working on. And one of the quotes that he came up with after interviewing all these people and doing this massive research is that which is most personal is most universal, right? So for those out there listening that might feel like no one understands me, am I the only one going through this? Will I be okay? Just remember, right? Those things that are most personal are also most universal, right? And it's our stories that give us power. So, like for me, as an example, one of the things that I started, I think I briefly mentioned this, but initially staying stuck in that place of having the job, right? And feeling like I arrived, like you said, right? Had the title, had the check, had the office, had people that counted on me and needed me, so I couldn't abandon them, right? Even though the irony in that is I wasn't really doing the job that I used to do because it changed, right? So, but I was convincing myself that people still needed me. And so through all of that battered career syndrome, without even really knowing that's what it was at the time, I initially started to feel really lost, confused, and not fulfilled, right? That caused me to question what my purpose really was, right? What was I truly working for? Like all that kind of stuff, I just kind of suppressed instead of expressed, right? Because I was pushing it down and burying it while I was fighting this other thing. But what that started to do then is that psychological and mental anguish and worry and anxiety started then to creep over into the physical, right? So I started to isolate. So then I wasn't going to the gym anymore, wasn't exercising. And because of that, I was feeling more tired, lack of energy, wasn't eating right. So that little snowflake, that little small snowball that started at the beginning, started to roll downhill and got bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then the impact, the internal impact started to bleed over into the external life, right? And that's the danger of the slippery slope. And it's at times it can be so slow that it builds up without us even realize how much it's building up, right? So again, the awareness, the education piece, and then us giving ourselves the space and the grace to be intentional about unpacking what's going on with, again, the perfect example of what you all provide, the services and how you go about doing it. But, and that's the thing, right? Just having the vulnerability and the courage to ask for help. Just find out what's going on, find out what the options are, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of that Ernest Hemingway quote, right? I think he was the one who said, in life, things happen first slowly, then suddenly. And what you're talking about is how interconnected everything is, right? It starts with the dissatisfaction, not feeling like you live your purpose. Then, dreading showing up to the office. Then, because that wears on you, are you then being the best version of yourself, even with your friends? You spoke about retreating and just not being who you potentially could be. According to a McKinsey study, they showed that 70% of employees define their sense of purpose through work. yet only 15% feel fulfilled in their current roles, right? So it just shows that huge disconnect. And you're absolutely right. I think the sad thing about with suffering from battered career syndrome, or when you get, I always say, right size, capsized, laid off, whatever you want to call it, people think they're the only ones going through it, and that's absolutely not the case. As a matter of fact, I feel that sometimes the best kept secret is that there is help out there, and it doesn't cost a lot, right? If you could just use somebody as a sounding board and get to a place where you could quiet your thinking and think about your thinking, so that you're not just being reactive, like going from one job thinking you need to immediately replace it with another job. That is just being reactive, as opposed to stepping back and saying, what would it look like if I were to give myself permission to just reimagine and reclaim the life of my dreams? And it is absolutely possible. I mean, look at where you're at right now, Dr. Mike. I mean, I and my colleagues get to speak to people, hundreds of thousands of people over the decades, who have absolutely been able to break free from those golden handcuffs, who've been able to break free and actually realize, like, oh my gosh, I do suffer from battered career syndrome. I just didn't know that it was a thing,
Yeah.
right? And there absolutely is help out there. As I mentioned before when we started the podcast, if you're even remotely curious about what it would take to break free and whether you are suffering from battered career syndrome, take our career health assessment by going to careercompassshow.com. Final thoughts here about maybe overcoming battered career syndrome, or a call to action, anything that you can think of, Dr. Mike?
So I guess the first thing is, to take your advice and go to the website, right, and do that assessment. But then also, like I said, don't be afraid to reach out, because I got to tell you, when I actually had the courage to finally make that step, right, and talk to a mentor, the first word that comes to mind, even just being able to share what I was feeling with someone who listened and could give me advice, the first word that pops in my mind is liberating. Right?
Mm.
It felt liberating, right, to be able to talk to and then start to face it head on, right? And so that's the first huge step, I think, because once you start down that path, then you're on the flip side of the coin, right? Right? You've actually taken that first step to reach out to, again, you all, and that the assessment and the website. And once you start down that path, then it starts to reverse the cycle of feeling trapped, because slowly you start to see that you're not alone and that there are options and you can be fulfilled, right? So, and then as that stuff starts to come out and you rediscover what you had in you, you just suppressed it, then it's a game changer, 100%.
Oh my gosh. And you know what? It does take courage, right, to leave your current comfort zone. And it's okay if you're afraid and fearful and you have sweaty palms, because when you leave your comfort zone, you will enter the fear zone, where there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions. But just because it's unknown and just because there are a lot of questions to be answered doesn't mean that it couldn't be potentially worth it. So don't make any decisions while you're in the fear zone. The beautiful thing is, once you get beyond the fear zone, you'll actually enter the learning zone, where you can open up your mind to possibilities that you didn't even know existed. I know my worldview forever changed, and I would love for other people to have that opportunity too, to understand that there's so many possibilities, there's so many opportunities. Once you break free from battered career syndrome, you're absolutely right, Dr. Mike. It is liberating. I feel so fortunate right now that I need to be careful not to suffer from something else, SOS, shiny object syndrome, because there's so many opportunities that I potentially could see. But you can only see them if you're willing to leave your comfort zone, be willing to muster up the courage to press through the fear zone so that you can enter the learning zone. And you know what happens after the learning zone? You get to enter the opportunity zone. This is where you can actually take control of your future, take control of your career, and manifest it in a way that allows you to live the life that you were meant to live. I think we are about to wrap up right now, but we have a very exciting topic next time. I think we're going to be talking about the importance of defining your career goals at this stage in your life. So I'm looking forward to visiting with you again, Dr. Mike, and unpacking what that looks like. Any final thoughts?
Now, just thank you so much. Thank you to all the listeners. I appreciate so much what you do, T, and can't thank you enough for having me on the episode.
Likewise, always a good time, and I appreciate your inside stock.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please go to yourcareerrevolution.com and request your free guide to the benefits of working with a career ownership coach. Thank you so much for listening.